Brothers and sisters, welcome back to the Behavior Revolution Scriptures. My name's Mark, and without further ado, let's just keep going, because in our last episode we were introduced, that was a long episode, wasn't it? The 10 plagues. Moshe and Aaron bringing on all these plagues. Yahusha stood up from his throne and flexed his muscles and, let everybody know what was really behind the curtain, like the Wizard of Oz. He ripped the curtain back to show them what they're worshipping. These people, these deities of wood and stone and mystical creatures that you're worshipping, sacrificing your children to protect you and provide for your lives, just a big giant farce. It's a lie. So he's ripped into them all and showed them and devastated the land of Egypt because of it. But Pharaoh's heart is still hard. So the last plague that was described to us last episode was the 10th plague, which was the death of the firstborn. And Yahusha has not carried that out yet. We were just introduced to it. Moshe has told Pharaoh that it's going to happen. At midnight tonight, he will pass through the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn sons will die in every family, from the oldest to the Pharaoh to the servant girl. So Moshe left the Pharaoh furious. Pharaoh would not listen, so that he could lift up his name in the nation, in the world, make his name famous, send it across the world, so people would know through the laying waste of this biggest nation, most powerful nation on earth, that Yahusha was the only living Elohim. And that was the whole purpose of Exodus. He took his people into slavery, into the nations, into Egypt. They mixed with the nations. Now when he brings them out, he's going to come out with a lot of the nations with them. A mixed multitude. And that, of course, symbolizes us today. Some of us have Hebrew blood, some of us don't. Most of us are mixed multitude. We've all been lost and scattered amongst the nations through the Babylonian and captivity. And we've been brought up in the pagan nations. I'm down here in Australia. A lot of people who are watching my videos are in the UK and United States of America. So we're all scattered across the world. We don't have to come together. We don't have to gather. Yahusha will gather us when he comes back. It's our purpose to be planted in whatever community he's planted us in, and grow and produce fruit, behavior. So Moshe's told everyone about the death of the firstborns, but it hasn't happened yet. That's where we're at here, guys. We're at the very first Moedim, the very first appointed time. So, remember, these appointed times weren't just invented here now. They've been going since creation, appointed times. Yahusha's always had these 7 appointed times in his framework, because he lives outside of... How did he know? Because he lives outside of time. He knows when he's going to come back next year, the year after, whenever he comes back. He knows when he's going to come back. And he knew when he was going to come to earth as a man, put on flesh. And he knew when he was going to do this in Egypt. He knew. So his pattern of 7s, the 7-day cycle, the weekly Shabbat, the Shemitah cycles, the Jubilee years, all this stuff was going on. And it was his record-keeping way of doing things. So this is the first Moedim, appointed time. And while it didn't really have a formal, there were times in Genesis where I mentioned that Yitzhak was sacrificed, or almost sacrificed. It was a time of Passover and things like that. Noah's Ark, it's the time of Shavuot. Moshe was born at the time of Shavuot. Things like that. There wasn't a formal instruction regarding these appointed times. So now we're coming into a part where Yahusha's giving us formal instructions, giving his people, I should say, here in Egypt, formal instructions of how to observe these, because he's bringing them together as their own nation. They're a huge nation of people without a land, without a culture, without an identity. And he's about to take them out of the Egyptian identity, culture, and make them a nation of their own, which means they need laws and regulations and rules and an identity of who they are and how they are to behave. So this is how it starts. Moshe's just explained the last plague, and now we come to the Passover lamb. And Yahusha spoke to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, from now on, this month, Abib, will be the first month of the year for you. So this is the first part of their identity, no matter what everyone else is saying. This is the first month of the year for you. This is how you will measure time. This is the first month. This is when your year begins. Abib will be the first month of the year for you. So tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, every year, they must choose a lamb for a sacrifice. Just one animal for each household. If a family is too small to eat a whole animal, then share it with another family and divide it accordingly. And when you're choosing the lamb, make sure it's a perfect 1-year-old male sheep or goat. Take very special care of this animal for 4 days until the evening of the 14th of the first month. Then they didn't have clocks or watches back then, so they're looking at the sun, they're looking at the moon. You know, they're obviously day and night is dictated by the sun coming up and down, but the moon dictated the months, you see. So that's why he's saying where is it? On the 10th day of this month, on the 10th day of this moon, choose a lamb. Keep it for 4 days until the evening of the 14th of this moon month. Then the whole community of Israel must slaughter their lamb at twilight on the 14th. Twilight is when in between day and night. It's when the sun's got that sort of dusk, and it's not quite dark yet, but it's pretty much about to be. That's pretty much on Fridays when we say, okay, we've got to get inside. Come, everyone inside, come on, let's go. It's twilight. That's that small grey area where let's get home quickly. It's getting dark. We can't see the sun anymore, but it's not dark. So that's twilight. Twilight on the 14th. Then they are to take some of the blood and smear it on the 2 doorposts and the top of the door frame of their houses, where they intend to eat the lamb. And that same night they must roast the meat over a fire and eat it along with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. Do not eat any of the meat raw or boiled in water. The whole animal, from nose to tail, including internal organs, must be roasted over a fire. And don't leave any of it until the next morning, but burn whatever is not eaten before morning. So in the turquoise here, unleavened bread is bread baked with no yeast or raising agents in it. The door represents ownership, claiming and redeeming those inside. So the door, Yahusha's the door, isn't he? The doorway to the house. So they're putting the blood over the door of the house, claiming and redeeming those inside. They're not to eat leaven, not have any leaven in their bread. And when you're eating this meal, make sure you are fully dressed, sandals on your feet and walking stick in your hand. And you will eat the meal in a hurry, for it's the Passover of Yahuwah. And on that very night, I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn son and firstborn male animal in the land of Egypt. I will execute judgment against all the false deities and idols of Egypt, for I am Yahuwah. But the blood on the doorposts will be a sign, marking the houses where you are staying. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. So you're tying in with Yitzhak. The Passover time is when I see the blood, and as the ultimate sacrifice, but also here, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And this plague of death will not touch you when I strike the land of Egypt. And this day will be a remembrance forever. Each year, from generation to generation, you must celebrate it as a special festival to me. This is my instruction for all time. For 7 days you will eat unleavened bread, and on the first day of the festival, remove every trace of yeast from your homes. Anyone who eats bread made with yeast during the 7 days of the festival will be cut off from the community of Israel. On the first day of the festival, and again on the 7th day, all the people must observe an official rest day to gather together. No work of any kind is allowed on these feasts, on these days, except to prepare food. And you will guard this festival of unleavened bread, for it will remind you that I brought all of your nation out of the land of Egypt on this very day. This festival is an everlasting instruction for you. So, what's that? An everlasting? Does that mean forever? It means you got to keep doing it. An everlasting instruction for you. Does that mean every part of this behavior here we have to do? Or does it mean that this observance should be observed forever? So celebrate this day from generation to generation, but don't forget the bread you eat must be made without yeast from the evening of the 14th until the evening of the 21st of that month. And during those 7 days, there must be no trace of yeast in your homes. Anyone who eats anything made with yeast during this week will be cut off from the community of Israel. These instructions apply both to the foreigners living among you and to the native-born Israelite. Do not eat anything made with yeast during this week, but wherever you live, eat only unleavened bread. Is he talking to us, or is he talking to Israel in Egypt? Is he telling us to do all this? Is he telling us to take in a lamb, a spotless lamb, on the 10th day of the first month? Keep it special, look after it, nurture it for 4 days. Slaughter it on the 14th of the first month. Put the blood on our doorposts and then bake bread without yeast. Is he telling us to do this? Or is this what he told them to do in Egypt? Now, anyone who's been watching videos of late will know how we feel, the Behaviour Evolution feels, about taking the feasts literally and doing all the childish, something in my eye, doing all the childish shadows outwardly. So I believe this is another one of those things that has a much more deeper significance than just not eating yeast, you know, not fasting, you know. Well, any one of us can go without food for a day, so what, you know. I mean, that's, health practitioners are proving that that's a really good way to live normally. You should fast for 8 to 10 hours every day. So, you know, fasting is not some grand scheme. It's not to bring you closer to Yahusha. You know, it's not, fasting is no big deal. We can do it, we don't do it, whatever. What's the deeper meaning of it? What's the deeper meaning here? Instead of just looking at getting your broom and dusting all the leaven out of your house and throwing all the Vegemite in the bin and all this wacky stuff that people are telling us to do, wasting our money, you know, and not eating, you know, eating cardboard crackers that look like they've been run over by a truck. You know, let's be intelligent about our belief, guys. Come out of the darkness. You know, I'm not going into all that now. You can think about that. I'll bring it up another time. We're in the middle of being told about what Israel was commanded to do at this time of Passover if they wanted to be delivered. So Moshe called all the elders of Israel together and said to them, "Go, pick out a lamb for each of your families and slaughter the Passover lamb, then drain the blood into a basin. Take a bundle of hyssop branches and dip it into the blood, and brush the hyssop across the top and sides of the door frames of your houses. And no one is to go out through the door until morning, for Yahuwah will pass through the land of Egypt to strike down the Egyptians. But when he sees the blood on the top of the sides of the door frames, Yahuwah will pass over your home and will not let his destroyer enter your house and strike you down. Remember to guard these instructions, and don't forget what I've told you, for this is an everlasting instruction that you and your descendants must observe forever." It says it there, Mark, we've got to do it forever. It's an everlasting instruction to do it forever. Yes, I agree with you. But today, in the 21st century, I believe instructions have transformed. Nothing, I'm not taking away from any of this. In fact, I'm saying what others don't say. I don't think there's different covenants. I don't think that circumcision has been abolished. I don't believe that sacrifices have been abolished. I believe that they've been transformed, in that an animal is not required because Yahusha did it, and circumcision is of our heart. And all these other nuances and instructions have been transformed because Yahusha doesn't change his mind. But behaviour transforms as he breathes more and more life into it. So that's all I'm going to say about that for now. But yes, this is an everlasting instruction. It's a moedim, an appointed time. It's been happening since creation. It's going to happen until, Yahusha comes back. And even then, if it's part of who he is, we'll be observing them, we'll be observing them in the new city, in the new kingdom. So, everlasting instruction that you and your descendants must observe forever. And when you enter the land that Yahuwah has promised to give you, you will continue to observe this festival. And this is the reason. Then when your children ask, what's the deal with this festival? Why do we have to do this? You will reply, it's the Passover slaughtering of Yahuwah, for he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt. And even though he struck down the Egyptians, he spared our families and delivered us from slavery and bondage. And when Musha had finished speaking, all the people bowed down to the ground and rejoiced before Yahuwah. And the turquoise here. When Yisrael used blood-dipped hyssop leaves to mark the doorways of their homes, it signified that Yahuwah had set apart his people as pure and not targets of the final judgment he was about to execute. That's the significance of the hyssop leaves. He'd set them apart and they were pure. He was, despite their behaviour and their idolatry, in his eyes, through the shedding of the animal blood, they were pure. He could approach them. Not in the same way he can approach through his own blood, but he can approach because he can only approach something on this earth, on this evil earth, if it's covered in blood. But to start with, he was using animal blood. So because the blood was there, he could approach. So the people of Israel did exactly what Yahuwah had commanded them through Musha and Aaron. And that night at midnight, Yahuwah struck down all the firstborn sons in the land of Egypt. From the firstborn son of the Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn son of the prisoner in the dungeon. Even the firstborn of their livestock were killed. The Pharaoh and all his officials and all the people of Egypt woke up during the night, and an extremely loud wailing was heard throughout all the land of Egypt. There was not a single house where someone had not died. Can you wrap your mind around this? In the middle of the night, you just woken up to this awful screaming. We have these birds up here that are called kulus, and they're screaming. When we first moved up here years ago, I used to call them raper birds. It sounds like a woman out there screaming her lungs out, like a woman screaming. And you'd wake up in the middle of the night, you'd go, what's going on? Who's being attacked? They're just birds. That's just nature. Imagine this, the whole nation crying out because there wasn't one house where someone had not died. Also, this was interesting from Yasha, also the likenesses, paintings and drawings of the firstborns of Egypt, which were carved into the walls of their homes, were destroyed and fell to the ground. And even the bones of their firstborns who had died before this, who they had buried in their houses, were dug up by the dogs that night and dragged before the Egyptians. What about this torment? This is like a Night of the Living Dead. This is like a horror movie. And all of Egypt saw this nightmarish judgment which had come upon them, and they all cried out with a loud voice, and all the families of Egypt wept unstoppably. All the families of Egypt wept unstoppably on that night for their firstborn sons, and the agonizing noise of confusion and terror was heard from a great distance. What about this nightmare? And Bathia, the daughter of the Pharaoh, who had drawn Musha as a baby from the river, went and found Musha and Aaron in their houses, and they were eating and drinking and rejoicing with all of Israel. And Bathia said to Musha, is this how you treat the woman who loved you and raised you? Is this my reward for all the good I've done for you? How could you bring such evil on me and your father's house? And Musha said to her, Mum, out of all the 10 plagues that Yahuwah has brought on Egypt, did any of them really affect you very much? Not really. And Musha said to her, although you are the firstborn to your mother, no harm will come to you. No evil shall reach you tonight. Because it was only firstborn sons, remember? So no evil shall reach you tonight. What help is that to me when I see the king, my brother, and all his household and subjects in this evil? whose firstborns have been slaughtered tonight with all the rest of Egypt? And Musha said to her, your brother the Pharaoh and his household, and all of his subjects and all the families of Egypt would not listen to the words of Pharaoh. Would not listen to the words of Yahuwah our Elohim. And that's why this evil has come upon them through this last great plague tonight. So we set her straight. In the turquoise here. Yahusha's judgment against the Pharaoh who was worshipped as a deity, his firstborn heir to the throne, also worshipped, and anyone who sided with him, most of Egypt, was without apology, without hesitation, and it affected every household, age, race, and status equally. The only deliverance that night was through the blood of the Lamb. Any Egyptian who joined a household sealed in the blood of the Lamb was protected. And any Israelite who did not seal their home with the blood was slaughtered with the rest of Egypt. There is no grey area with Yahusha, no lukewarmness, only hot or cold, sealed in his blood through his name, or not. There is no deliverance or power in any other name than Yahusha. And today, everyone on this planet, this is in the 21st century, today everyone on this planet who ignores the instruction to repent, be immersed and sealed, will suffer the same deathly fate as Egypt on that first Passover night. So his judgment was without hesitation, and it was not biased. It affected everyone, age, race, status. Interestingly, if any Egyptian caught wind of this instruction and believed it, they could go into a Israelite home and be protected. And likewise, any Israelite who poo-pooed it and thought, oh, forget it, and didn't mark their doorways, they were slain. Their firstborns were slain. So if you're not obedient, you're not protected. That's the takeaway here. And you can see the image here of Yahusha with the nail through his hand. Just as the lambs entered Yisrael's home on the 10th day, Yahusha rode into Jerusalem and was held, inspected, and tried for 4 days. Remember, the lambs had to be held for 4 days and looked after and inspected to make sure they were perfect? Well, Yahusha was held for 4 days too, inspected and tried for 4 days, and having been found spotless and innocent, with no leaven, which is evil behaviour, his blood was shed and he endured the bitterness of the torture stake, just like they had to do to have bitter herbs. And none of his bones were broken, just like the lambs. He then resurrected from the dead and paid the bride price in order to buy back his bride, wash her clean, and seal his covenant marriage home. So we jumped forward 1,000 or so years, give or take, and seeing what Yahusha did. And I mean, that's the whole purpose, that's the whole reason we're going through this, isn't it? Are you still out there blowing horns and sacrificing lamb's blood and, fasting and putting palm branches and building sukkahs and, doing all this wacky religious stuff? Because if you are, it's like you're grabbing your sandal and just whacking Yahusha across the face. It's like he took on the bitterness. He took on the bitter herbs of the torture stake. He was the lamb. He took on the nails, the crown of thorns. He took on all of it for you, for me. He took on more bitterness than you will ever and I will ever experience, but he did it for the joy of it that would follow, to buy back his bride, wash her clean, and seal her. Seal his covenant marriage home. It was all about the covenant marriage home. Again, and anyone was welcome to join it if they would graft in and be obedient. This was another interesting point. Lambs were sacred animals to the Egyptians. They were seen as divine, and one of their deities even had the head of a goat. So lambs were sacred to the Egyptians. They were seen as divine, and one of their deities even had the head of a goat. When the Passover lambs were taken into the homes of the Hebrews and kept as pets, it would have been seen as a mockery to their sacred deity. So even through this Passover, Yahusha's mocking their idolatry. So they took lambs or goats into their homes as pets. Would have been seen as a mockery to their sacred deity. The lambs were then slaughtered in front of the houses in plain view of any Egyptian. And then the blood of the animal was put on display by smearing it on the doorposts of the home. It was as if the Yisrael had complete contempt for the Egyptians, saying, "We have brought your sacred deity into our houses, treated them like our own pets, and have then murdered them." That's very ballsy behaviour on Yisrael's part. So this just gives you a bit of an eye-opener into their culture and how offensive it was, what they were doing. Just this simple Passover, slaughtering animals and putting the blood on the doorposts, was going against the Egyptian idolatry. So the Egyptians could have come down hard on them, but fortunately, they were too busy, their nation was in tatters. So, where are we? 26. Let's keep going. Yisrael's exodus from Egypt. So the firstborns have been slain, and Egypt is in tatters, in devastation. Not only of their homes and livestock and everything, all the plagues, the 10 plagues. This is the 10th plague, death of the firstborn, and not one home every home had death in it. Then the Pharaoh sent for Moshe and Aaron during the night. "You cruel and heartless bastards, look what you've done. Get the hell out of my country now. You have completely devastated us. You are a foul stench in my nostrils. Leave my nation alone. Take your pathetic people and go. Go and worship whatever the hell you want. Take your flocks and herds. Get the hell out of Egypt right now before I kill you all. Let me be free of you and your filthy kind. Just go. Go, get out." He's had it with them. And all the Egyptians were panicking also, and they screamed at the people of Egypt to get out of the land as quickly as possible, saying, "For goodness sake, take whatever you want. Just leave this place. We're all dying because of you." So Yisrael took their bread dough before the yeast was added. They wrapped their kneading bowls in their cloaks and carried them on their shoulders. And the people of Yisrael did as Moshe had instructed, asking the Egyptians for clothing and articles of silver and gold. And Yahuwah caused the Egyptians to give them whatever they asked for. Yahusha gave them whatever they asked for. And by doing this, Yisrael actually stripped and plundered the Egyptians of all their wealth as they left Egypt. They took all the gold and silver idols, everything, jewelry. They took all the bling with them. They pillaged and plundered all the Egyptians. And that's them walking out of Egypt. So the people of Yisrael left Ramesses and began traveling towards Sukkoth, where Yaakov, Sukkoth is not only an appointed time, it's where Yaakov first camped when he left the slavery of his uncle Laban. Not only did Yisrael stop there at Sukkoth, Yaakov did as well, after he left his slavery from his uncle. It's not just a place, but a Moedim, appointed time rehearsal. There were about 600,000 men, plus all the women and children, and a mixed multitude rabble of non-Israelites travelled with them, along with great flocks and herds of livestock, about 3 million people. 3 million people. For food, they baked flat cakes from the unleavened dough they had brought from Egypt. It was made without yeast because the people were driven out of Egypt in such a hurry that they had no time to prepare the bread or other food. The people of Yisrael had lived in Egypt for 430 years. This is like the end of a chapter, guy, end of an era. The people of Yisrael had lived in Egypt for 430 years, and on this last day of the 430th year, it was actually the 430th year on the dot, Yahusha showed his people that he indeed keeps his promises and delivered the children of Yisrael, his treasured possession, from their agonizing burden of slavery. He had heard their distress and torture, and he remembered his eternal blood covenant promise to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Jacob. And through miraculous signs and wonders, and with an outstretched arm, he was setting his people free. So this night belongs to Yahusha, and it must be celebrated every year by all of Yisrael from generation to generation. That's why we observe this festival in commemoration. It's not about the outward things that we do, the bread and the blood and the leaven or no leaven, whatever. It's about commemoration, about this is Yahusha's night. This night belongs to Yahusha, where he kept his promises. He keeps his promises. You can stand on his word. From generation to generation. Then we come to the instructions for the Passover. And this video is all about the Passover, so we'll close on this, guys. Instructions for the Passover. Then Yahusha said to Moshe and Aaron, "These are the instructions for the festival of Passover. No outsiders from the uncircumcised nations, the Goyim, are allowed to eat the Passover meal with you." So if you're having a party, don't invite unbelievers to the Passover. This is other feasts you can do that too if you'd want to. But this Passover meal is for believers, or circumcised believers. No one in the nations is to eat this Passover with you. However, any slave who has been purchased may eat it with you if they have been circumcised. Temporary residents and hired servants may not eat either. Each Passover lamb must be eaten in one house. Don't carry any of its meat outside, and don't break any of its bones. Because this is symbolic of Yahusha. He had none of his bones broken. The two criminals that died next to him did. They got sick of waiting for him to die, so they broke their legs, and that caused their chests to fall in and they suffocate. But Yahusha, they didn't. They pierced him in the side, and he was already dead. He wasn't fighting it. He waited until he was ready, and then he gave up his spirit. If there are any foreigners living among you who want to eat the Passover, celebrate the Passover of Yahuwah, let all their males be circumcised first, so that their households may be sealed in my eternal blood covenant of deliverance. Only then may they celebrate the Passover with you, like any native-born Israelite. But no one outside of my blood covenant may ever eat the Passover meal. And this instruction applies to everyone, whether a native-born Israelite or a foreigner living among you. Well, we're all foreigners. We're from the mixed multitudes. We might have Israelite blood in us from one of the tribes. So all the people of Israel did what Yahusha had commanded. And on that very day, Yahusha brought the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt. Like a mighty army gathered into tribes, they left. From the cruelty of abuse and hard labor, they left. Cheering, singing and rejoicing, they left. Ecstatic that the Elohim of Abraham, Yitzhak and Jacob and Yusuf had indeed remembered their agony and his everlasting blood covenant with them. And after 430 years, he was bringing them home to the promised land. His covenant marriage home, a residence prepared and protected by blood. They left. The mixed multitude did not leave, most of them didn't leave as a separate company. They were all sort of in a military formation in tribes, and most of the mixed multitude were joined to tribes. So they didn't just have 12 tribes and then a mixed multitude. They would have had a few stragglers, but most of the mixed multitude had joined certain tribes and families, so they were traveling in amongst the tribes. So there's still 12 tribes traveling through. 12 tribes traveling too, all right? This was amazing. This was also a Jubilee year. Do you remember what happened on the Jubilee year? Every 50th year, every year. This year was also a Jubilee year, a year that occurred every 50 years. 7 Shemitah cycles, remember? 7 times 7 years. Every 7 years was a Shemitah cycle. So every 7 Shemitah cycles, the next year, 50th year, was a Jubilee year, which meant all debts were paid and all slaves were set free. What about Yahusha's timing? So had he forgotten about them, or was it his timing? If he'd come and interceded the year before, Moshe may not have been ready, and it wouldn't have been a Jubilee year. It was a Jubilee year. He does things in his timing. That doesn't mean we should look to the next Jubilee year and assume Yahusha's going to come back, because that's, he said, I may come back early. You will not know the day or the time, but we will know the season and the appointed time. It will be at the trumpets. The mixed multitude, this is a little interesting side bit here. Yahusha called Abram, the first Hebrew, out of Babylon and brought him to the promised land. Remember, go back in your mind to our videos. Yahusha called Abram, the very first Hebrew, out of Babylon and brought him to the promised land. Now Yahusha was calling a mixed multitude out of Egypt to the land also. This is a pattern that will be repeated over and over. When Abram left Egypt after Yahusha punished the Pharaoh for taking his bride, he left with riches and Hagar. She was from the nations, she was mixed multitude. Then Yitzhak, the son of promise, was born at the appointed time of Passover. So we see Yahusha using a pattern of bondage and deliverance from slavery to bring about his restored blood covenant people. You get that? Abraham went into Egypt, and because there was a famine, he didn't trust Yahusha, went into Egypt. He was taken as slaves. He was taken as a slave, him and Sarah. The Pharaoh wanted to marry Sarah and take her as his own. And Yahusha sent plagues, remember? And Abram was kicked out, and Sarah was kicked out with gifts and a mixed multitude. Sarah, probably others too. And the same is happening here. You touch Yahusha's bride, there'll be plagues, mate. There'll be serious consequences. Do you walk around facing that you are Yahusha's bride? Do you walk around facing that anyone who touches you, says anything about you, will have serious consequences on them? You don't have to bring them about. You just let them have it, man. Yahusha does it. So Yahusha uses this pattern of bondage and deliverance from slavery to bring about his restored blood covenant people. That's enough for today, guys. This is my 4th episode and I'm losing my voice. I'm getting husky. That's enough. Love you guys. It's been phenomenal going through this. They were delivered by the blood of the Lamb. They still didn't even fully know, appreciate, comprehend who it was that was delivering them. Do you realize that? Because it was the elders that Moshe and Aaron were talking to, elders of the common folk. As we've seen in the movies that we've watched, there's all these people from the peanut gallery having opinions and saying stuff, and no, we shouldn't, but Yahusha has his way anyway. But most of the common folk still wouldn't have known Yisrael, they would have been told what to do, but they still didn't fully understand why. They were just following orders. They didn't really know their Elohim. They didn't fully understand it. And that's why he would bring them out into the wilderness to teach them, to reason with them. So in our next episode, we're going to start going into the wilderness wanderings. Well, actually, probably not next episode, because next episode we'll deal with the Red Sea. But after that, we come into the wilderness wanderings and the testing. Yahusha tested them to see if they would be obedient, just like he's testing us today, to see if we will be obedient. So this first appointed time festival on Moedim was the blood of the perfect lamb. And that's what delivers us, guys. That's what we are washed in daily, because remember that sacrifice was done for us outside of time. Yahusha offered up his blood in the in the interdimensional realm. No such thing as heaven or hell. He went into the other dimension, offered up his blood. That other dimension is outside of time. So that blood still stands today. It's just as powerful as it did on the day that he shed it, just as it did back at creation when he knew all this was going to happen. So stand strong on the blood of the Lamb and the word of your testimony, where you've been, what you've come through, what Yahusha's done in your life. It's phenomenal, guys. These plagues, this is happening in the world right now. The darkness, what about the darkness of the depression, the suicidal thoughts and the demons and all that darkness that comes? That's where we live now, guys. How many people are riddled with diseases and riddled with mental disorders? It's the biggest new religion, really. Pharmaceuticals and the, priesthood of the mental disorders, the psychology, psychiatric thing. It's just demons. But no one will admit it. No one will face it. So, but you can, and you can come out of it. All this listening to thoughts and talking to yourself, and you're nuts. That's demons. You're talking to demons. You're not talking to yourself. You're talking to someone else. You're talking to voices in your head. They're real. They want to get you, make you go mad, so you can't sleep at night, so you can't behave. You've got shifty behaviour, and you're looking at weird, doing all weird stuff, Evil behaviour, disobedience. All these sneaky things we hide in the folds of our tent, to control that thing that we're in. So guys, the blood of the Lamb has washed you clean. If you're not receiving and have the relief of that in your day, you're missing out. Stand on it. You've been washed clean. And then it's up to you, through the power of Yahusha's Ruach inside you, to overcome all the bad habits. But he's laid the groundwork. He's given you a clean slate. And anytime someone, most of the time it's in our own mind, things get reminded to us from our past. Yeah, well, I did do that, yeah. And I've been forgiven. Or maybe it's Yahusha bringing it up. Yeah, I did do that. I was like that. Sorry, Father. He throws it. Sorry, it's gone. And walk. Keep running. Running. Don't let anything hold you back. Thoughts, depressions, moods, emotions. Throw them off. Run forward, guys. In the blood of the spotless Lamb. I love you, guys. Claim your Passover. Claim the blood of Yahusha on your life. And thrive and shine. See you later.